Welcome, everyone. Good evening. This is Dhaiphong, and you are tuning into another live stream. As you can see here, I am joined by journalist and co-founder of Electronic Intifada, the Palestinian-American journalist, the great Ali Abunimah, returning guest. Welcome, Ali. Thanks so much for coming back on.
Thank you, Danny.
Great. So before we begin, everyone, make sure that you're liking the stream. That helps boost this in the algorithm. And be sure to check out all the links in the video description to support the channel. But we're going to get started right away here because Ali has a schedule to keep and we want to be respectful of his time. But I wanted to get you on, Ali, obviously, because the last 48 hours or so, just a hair under, have been incredibly eventful when it comes to Palestine and, of course, Israel's retaliation to Palestinian resistance that has been ongoing since the early hours of October 7th. Could you just begin, and I'll post some photos and videos, images of what's been going on as you're speaking, but could you just begin by outlining what has happened here? Because I'm hearing and seeing things like Palestinian forces have enacted a casualty rate of 2 to 1. Usually it's the opposite. There's, Palestinian resistance forces, Hamas, breaking through the fences in Gaza, taking back some land. There's all sorts of, you've probably been hearing the Western mainstream media talk a lot about kidnappings and all kinds of things like that. Kidnappings of major generals, of so-called civilians, settlers. I mean, on and on and on. So I'll pull up some images while you're talking, but please do, if you can, give an outline of what's been happening in this conflict as of right now.
We're witnessing something historic that people are stunned. I mean, people in Palestine, people across the Arab world, of course, people in Israel, absolutely stunned. Things have turned on their heads. And I actually, for the last 48 hours, have watched almost no US or Western media, partly to preserve my mental health, but mostly because it's not informative. So I don't know if people who are watching this primarily through Western media have any sense of the massive scale and transformative nature of what's happening, that Hamas, and not just Hamas, but other Palestinian resistance groups, launched a major coordinated offensive, breaking out of the besieged, occupied Gaza Strip, occupying 24 Israeli colonies near Gaza, one as far as 22 kilometers away from Gaza, off Akim. They seized several Israeli military bases and checkpoints. They killed Israeli soldiers inside military bases. They took over heavily fortified bases and took soldiers captive, including senior officers. They used weapons that nobody knew they had. They put out video showing what we can see now on the screen, them using paragliders or paramotors. They are using suicide drones, and they're using drones that are capable of dropping munitions. And they actually published videos of them destroying tanks and destroying automated machine gun nests using airdropped munitions. And they have done it with military skill and coordination that nobody knew they had, that was known to be a capability of, say, Hezbollah in Lebanon, but it wasn't known to be this level of capability from the Palestinian resistance. And at the same time, they utterly destroyed the myth of Israeli military prowess and competence and invincibility. And they exposed Israel's army as completely a shambles, as incompetent. Israeli intelligence, which has this, legendary reputation that they're so good, completely had no awareness that this was coming. This has been compared with the surprise that Israel experienced exactly 50 years ago, almost to the day, the October 1973 war, when Egypt and Syria launched a surprise attack in order to liberate the occupied Sinai Peninsula and the occupied Golan Heights. And Egypt, the Egyptian forces succeeded in crossing the Suez Canal and in breaching what was called the Bar-Lev line, after the Israeli general Haim Bar-Lev, which the Israelis believed was impregnable. And that was an utter shock, and it led eventually to the end of the political career of Golda Meir and a lot of repercussions. In a sense, this is even bigger because this is the first time in history that any Arab force or any Palestinian force has taken the battle inside Israeli territory. Because the Israeli military doctrine was always that wars should be conducted on its terms, on its timing, and outside its borders or its boundaries. Israel doesn't really have borders. And this time it was Hamas that determined the time and the place and the manner. And now, as we're speaking, 48 hours or more, around 48 hours into the offensive, the Israelis have still not regained control of all the settlements around Gaza, and they've evacuated 75,000 settlers from the lands around Gaza. So it is a stunning achievement. It has stunned Palestinians, it has stunned Israelis, it has stunned the whole Arab world. And I think and it has really stunned the world. But I think if you're looking at it through the lens of Western media, or the lens of Western liberal thinking, you're not going to you may well miss the significance and just the incredible nature of what we're witnessing.
Yes, indeed. And I was just putting up a lot from especially Richard Medhurst, who has been posting all over Twitter on his threads of just what are chaotic events, but are just incredible historically, just in terms of how rapidly things have deteriorated for Israeli forces, but also just how organized and how coordinated the Palestinian resistance has been. And I'm just wondering, Ali, there's been a lot of theories. You mentioned some intelligence failures. There are some I'm hearing talking about, was this an inside job, a false flag? Others are saying, well, this has to do with a context that isn't really spoken about in terms of support for Palestinian resistance. And and just how strong it has been, and maybe waiting for the right moment to strike. I'm just wondering what your opinion is about how this happened in your estimation as you've been following these events.
Well, no, this wasn't an inside job. This was the Palestinian resistance that has been developing its capabilities under Israeli siege for many, many years by necessity, and very skillfully and very secretively. They have been getting help. There is mutual aid among the regional resistance groups, particularly with Hezbollah and Lebanon. And it's not a secret that Iran supports the Palestinian resistance. Palestinians, as a colonized people struggling for their liberation, have a right to seek aid from anywhere they can get it. Just as Europeans, we just published an article by Joseph Massad on the electronic intifada, and he made the point that all the criticism that Palestinians get from Arab regimes and from Western governments and Western liberals about, oh, you take support from Iran. Well, it's not as if the Palestinians turn down support from other countries. Nobody else is offering the Palestinians material support for their liberation struggle. Uh, but saying Palestinians shouldn't take support from Iran uh, is to say that they have no right to resist and no right to defend themselves, and clearly they do. So Iran is certainly a factor, but the extent to which, how they coordinate, how they develop weapons, these are all very closely guarded secrets, and anyone who tells you they know that is lying to you. I mean, there was a laughable article today in the Wall Street Journal, of all places, that says, "Oh, Iran helped plan the operation, and it gave its
Right.
approval in a meeting held in Beirut last week. It gave the go-ahead in a meeting, and this was confirmed to the Wall Street Journal by uh, senior officials from Hamas and Hezbollah." And you actually read the article, it's just totally hilarious because, of course, they don't name any officials who said that. And yeah, it's really credible that Hamas and Hezbollah are going to spill their most closely held secrets to an American, rabidly anti-Iran, anti-resistance neocon rag. That's where they're going to go and choose to tell their secrets to. So it's just BS. But so one of the factors that I think uh, Israel can't ignore, and its defense minister Yoav Gallant said this a few months ago, is that Israel is no longer in a position where it can decide to uh, limit any military confrontation to one front. There is now the potential for a multi-front war, which involves not just Hamas in Gaza, but also the northern front with Hezbollah and potentially Iran and Syria. And the it's always been thought that Hezbollah has tremendous capabilities, tremendous missile capabilities, and fighting abilities, because Hezbollah defeated Israel in combat when Israel invaded Lebanon in 2006. And of course, before that, Hezbollah forced Israel out of Lebanon. Israel had been occupying southern Lebanon for 20 years until the year 2000, when the Israeli forces were forced to abandon southern Lebanon. Then they came back in 2006, and Israel and Hezbollah defeated them again. And after that, you had all this sort of self-doubt in Israel saying, we have to learn the lessons, and the IDF was not prepared, and we have to do better. And this is the result, that they were beaten by Hamas, who is completely besieged in Gaza, surrounded on all sides. And so the question that must be on a lot of minds in Israel and in Washington and in among Israel's other sponsors and partners in crime is, if this is what Hamas can do from Gaza, what can Hezbollah do from Lebanon. And so now Israel is in a really difficult situation from its perspective, of course, where the Israeli people have just seen their vaunted legendary military completely fail to protect them, just collapse. The whole so-called Gaza division of the Israeli army just melted away. Its senior officers killed or captured. Its bases taken over by the Palestinian resistance and put on display on television. Just rows of abandoned tanks and armored vehicles, soldiers captured in their underwear and so on, or killed. We saw many images of Israeli soldiers killed. And their whole government and military echelon, who, these tough guys who we're all about security and we're all about protection, caught completely with their pants down. And so Israel has to appease that rage and anger and fear by doing something big. And that's what they're already doing, which is bombing Gaza, just bombing civilian homes out of revenge, massacring entire families. What they always do, but they're now doing it even more. But they now have a situation where there is over at least 100, Hamas and Islamic Jihad is saying 130 Israeli prisoners of war and detainees in Gaza. So there's a limit to how wild Israel can go, even though it has a green light to go wild from Joe Biden, because of the fact that it's prisoners of war in Gaza, and because of the risk that that Hezbollah could enter on the northern front. So this is a situation that really exposes Israel's weakness and failure, and completely destroys its image as this plucky, powerful little Sparta that is just invincible. And people have seen that Israel can be defeated and was defeated. And as much as it may go in and murder people just in revenge in Gaza, which it is doing and will do, that will not erase the defeat.
Yes, and the major leaders of the Al-Qassam have said that Israel, the IDF, would be smart to take note that the estimations they have of hostages, of those who have been kidnapped, scattered across Gaza,
I don't say kidnapped, because they are prisoners of war and detainees. Because unless we're willing to use, the media, the human rights groups, and the governments, unless they're willing to refer to the thousands of Palestinians abducted at gunpoint from their homes in night raids every night across the West Bank, held without charge or trial in Israel's dungeons, nobody calls those abducted people. That in fact they call them by this nice polite term, administrative detainees. So let's refer to them as Israeli prisoners of war and administrative detainees in Gaza, just to be fair and equal and consistent. But having said that, the Israeli, the clear thing to say, I just want to make this point, is that none of this was inevitable. Israel brought this on itself, because the leaders of Hamas said that they tried through every possible mediator and every way to get Israel to agree to a prisoner exchange. There were already a couple of Israelis detained in Gaza, and the bodies of several soldiers held by Hamas. And Israel just utterly refused. And they have increased the number of abductions in the West Bank to 20-year highs. So, and on the political front, Hamas has for years tried to pursue a political path following the model of the IRA in Northern Ireland, and they just found the door slammed in their face at every turn by Israel, by the United States, by the Europeans. And so, as Nelson Mandela said, Nelson Mandela wrote in his amazing book, The Long Walk to Freedom, it is the oppressor, not the oppressed, who determines the form of the struggle. If the oppressor uses violence, the oppressed have no choice but to respond with violence. And this is precisely the situation the Palestinian people are in. And there's just an utter lack of reflection and self-reflection among Israel and its allies who simply refuse to understand that. And the result has been not the Palestinians getting weaker as Israel has besieged Gaza, but the Palestinians and the regional resistance getting stronger and more confident and more capable. That has been the result of their total unwillingness to deal with the Palestinians as human beings, as people who deserve their rights, deserve their liberation, who are a people, an indigenous people on their land, and who are attached to their land. Their utter contempt for the Palestinian people, the dehumanization of the Palestinian people, I think is a large part of this. Israel believed its own myths of technological and military, and I would add racial superiority. And that, to a great extent, led to the complacency in which they could not possibly believe that the Palestinians could mount such a sophisticated and sustained offensive. That, it's also important to note, is widely and deeply supported by the Palestinian people. There was I'll just say this, there was sort of a TV presenter, some influencer from the United Arab Emirates, who posted this concern trolley comment about saying, oh, well, has Hamas thought about how they are going to protect the people of Gaza from Israel's revenge? So, this defeatist language which says you can't fight. The Vietnamese should not fight for their liberation because the Americans are just going to carpet bomb them and napalm them, so they should surrender. That's the logic that's being put forward. And I was touched by one of the comments I read from a Palestinian woman in Gaza. She said, it's not the resistance that protects the people of Gaza. It's the people of Gaza who protect the resistance. And I thought that that was just such a neat encapsulation of the depth and the breadth of support that the resistance has among the Palestinian people, and indeed the people of the region. Of course, not the Arab tyrants and regimes that are slaves to the United States and Israel, but the people.
Yes, all very good points. And I wanted to definitely ask, given you highlighted that double standard with the prisoners of war language versus kidnapping, which definitely well noted, especially since Al-Qassam was warning that these tactics, right? They're very strategic. They're warning that, hey, Israel, if you're going to bomb us and raise us, you're going to also potentially be killing your quote unquote your own. At the same time, I wanted to ask you, because these tactics, they feel like, I don't know if you've ever read the book I Die in Colonialism by Frantz Fanon. Algeria, like the Algerian struggle and the guerrilla warfare tactics. And I think a lot of people looking at this see it. You just mentioned the support that the resistance has with the Palestinian people. When people look at this from the outside, they think, well, warfare is like tanks and guns and weapons and armies clashing. But here, when you have this colonial situation, it doesn't take that form necessarily, even though you do have this incredible open air resistance that is massive, but obviously built up and coordinated. And I wanted to ask, talk about the conditions that then leads to this, because people don't join resistance and don't end up conducting guerrilla warfare unless they are indeed an occupied and oppressed people. So could you talk about the conditions in Gaza, what leads to these tactics with these strategies, so people can understand that there is no both sidesing this thing, because I see that a lot. There's a lot of that going around. A lot of oh, well, look at all these unverified videos of people, of so-called Israeli civilians being tortured and in the streets and all of this. Talk about the conditions that the Palestinian people have had to live through in Gaza and broader Palestine under Israeli colonialism.
Well, Israel is a settler colony, and it only exists because the vast majority of the indigenous Palestinian people were brutally ethnically cleansed from their towns and villages in 1948. And Gaza exists because of that. What we know today is the Gaza Strip. Of course, there was always an ancient city called Gaza going back to ancient times, but what we call the Gaza Strip is a result of the 1948 ethnic cleansing and partition of Palestine. So today you have more than 2 million people in Gaza. 50% of them are children, and 2/3 of them are refugees from lands, from towns and villages that are in the area around Gaza. Many of them can see their former homes from, over the Gaza fence. And many of these Israeli colonies, which we always hear about, like Sderot and Ofakim and all of the Kisufim and all of these, are built on ethnically cleansed Palestinian villages and lands of people who are now in Gaza. The city of Ashkelon, the Israeli city of Ashkelon, was the Palestinian city of Majd al-Asqalan. And by the way, the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians from Majd took place in 1950. I mean, Israel was created, most of the ethnic cleansing was in 1948, but even up to 1950, Israel was putting Palestinians on trucks, literally, and sending them to Gaza and stealing their land. And so Gaza is a massive open-air prison. It is a ghetto in every sense of the word. It is where Israel put surplus Palestinians solely and exclusively because they're not Jewish. And so their existence as non-Jews on their own land threatens Israel's so-called Jewish character. This is why Zionism is a fundamentally racist project. And from 1967, when Israel occupied Gaza, it started putting settlers in Gaza. So until the year 2005, 40% of Gaza's land, 40% of it, this is a tiny area, it's about the size of Washington, D.C., 40% of Gaza's land was reserved for about 6,000 Israeli settlers. And the other 1.5 million at the time, 1 million, 1.5 million Palestinians, were on 60% of the land. And the settlers got the beaches, they got most of the seafront. So you had the settler-only seafront and beaches, you had the settler-only roads. Gaza was divided north to south and often cut off. It was a prison. Then in 2005, due to the resistance, the Israelis decided that they could no longer hold on to Gaza. It was too costly. So they decided to not end the occupation of Gaza, but change the occupation of Gaza. They pulled the settlers out of Gaza and they placed Gaza under siege. They simply moved the occupation to the perimeter, but they never ended their control of Gaza. They never allowed Palestinians in Gaza to live freely or to come and go as they wished. And then in 2006, there was a Palestinian election. This was the first Palestinian legislative election in, that had been held in quite a while, that Israel finally allowed, and Hamas won. And after Hamas won, instead of respecting the result of the election and allowing Hamas to pursue a political path and see what would unfold, new political possibilities could unfold. Israel, with the full support of the United States and the Europeans and their Arab client regimes in the region, imposed an even tighter siege on Gaza. And from 2006, 2007 onwards, Gaza has been an open-air prison. And I traveled to Gaza 10 years ago. It's the only time I was able to go to Gaza. This was in May of 2013, and I went through Egypt when it was a little bit easier because President Mohamed Morsi had not yet been overthrown and murdered by the Sisi regime that is now in power. And we were able to get into Gaza. I was with a delegation. I spent a week there, and it was extraordinary because even in that week, I was able to see so much. And one of the incredible things I saw was the tunnels. We were given permission to go down into the tunnels that existed at the time because of the Israeli siege. There were so many basic needs basic goods that were unavailable in Gaza. So Palestinians dug tunnels under the border with Egypt. And Egypt later destroyed them because, they were doing the bidding of Israel and the United States. I don't know if any of the tunnels on the Egyptian side still exist. It's possible that some have come back. But at the time, there were a lot of tunnels. And we went into a tunnel that I just want to describe for a second because there was a vertical shaft with a platform that was a circular steel platform that was, I would say, large enough to park 2 cars on. This was a big circular platform. And the platform went up and down. So there was like a rail system, and you went in at the top, and then the platform went down vertically about, 100 feet or so underground. And then there was a horizontal tunnel that went into Egypt that was deep underground and that was wide enough to drive a car through. And there was electricity and there was lighting, and it was stunning. I mean, the engineering of this thing was incredible. It was so impressive. And this was a goods tunnel that we were allowed to see. So this was not a military tunnel. We were not taken to any of the resistance facilities underground. But just seeing that, I can only imagine the scale of the deep underground facilities that the resistance has built in Gaza. Deep underground, sophisticated, extensive, that must exist, and that Israel could never reach. I don't think there's any way that Israel, if it invades Gaza by ground now, will be able to reach that network to any extent. And so the sophistication of the resistance has developed by necessity, by the conditions that the occupier, the colonizer, has imposed on Palestinians. And that's just Gaza, which, after all, is just 2 or 3% of the territory of historic Palestine. In the West Bank, we have a situation where you have more and more Israeli settlers, whereas they took the settlers out of Gaza. There are more and more in the West Bank, and you have now a resurgence. For many years, Israel has managed to suppress a lot of the armed resistance in the West Bank because of the collaboration of the Palestinian Authority, which is an Israeli-American proxy force. It's armed and trained and funded by the United States with the permission of Israel and the Europeans in order to police and repress the Palestinians on behalf of Israel. So the PA is Israel's, fist against the Palestinian people and their resistance in the West Bank. But over the last months, the PA and Israel have been losing control in the West Bank, and there has been a resurgence of armed resistance there, particularly in the north. And that's why we've seen Israel going in and committing massacre after massacre in places like Jenin and Aqbat Jabir and in other refugee camps and towns in the West Bank, in order to try to suppress the resurgent resistance in the West Bank. So there is a situation of growing resistance under a situation of raw, brutal settler colonialism, and it's totally unsustainable. There is no military, quote unquote, solution to this for Israel. There's no technical solution. There's no, if we build higher walls or come up with some technology to detect tunnels. Israel spent billions building what it thought was an impregnable barrier along the border with Gaza that goes, 10 meters in the air and 10 meters underground. And look what the resistance were able to do. So these are the conditions in which Palestinians exist and are resisting. And the Israeli settler colony at the same time is in a state of deep political and social crisis, where the sort of it's far beyond the pioneer phase of the early days of Israel, when people were more, people, there was more motivation and more willingness to sacrifice for the settler colonial project. These, were hard settler pioneers who were determined to establish their colony and willing to do whatever it took. Israel today is a spoiled, late capitalist consumer society where, like many other places, a lot of people are interested in, consumption and iPhones and sneakers, and are not that willing to make huge sacrifices. The motivation isn't there. And that's a key difference. Israel may have all of these weapons and all of the support from the United States and all the funding, but they don't have the motivation that the Palestinian resistance has. And that is a massive factor also in the ability of a resistance movement or an anti-colonial movement to prevail, is the motivation factor. And so that, in a nutshell, are some of the conditions, I think, that have brought us to this point. But I think the key thing is the utter refusal of Israel and its international sponsors, principally among them the United States, to countenance any concession, any real concession to Palestinian rights and humanity that has brought things to this point. Israel brought this entirely on itself. All the violence, all the bloodshed is Israel's fault. Israel and the United States and its other enablers. They did this. It was their choice.
Yes, and maybe we could close on the political reaction and some, I guess, some military reaction, all intertwined. We have the United States, Biden, Blinken, all doubling down on support for Israel. There's aircraft carriers and fighter jets, all kinds of things going to Israel to fortify that crisis that you just described to any significant degree, what's possible. Then you also have forces like Ilhan Omar, and you even have the so-called liberal governments in Europe, the entire European Union, all double down on the narrative of Palestinian atrocities to some form or another. You have the UK now shining Israeli flags, the entire European Union doing the same. You have Vladimir Zelensky, the hero in Ukraine, or the zero in Ukraine, maybe we should say, also come out with multiple statements. Some think he's begging for weapons while also kind of intimating that he supports Israel 100%. But we have all these reactions. And then you also have political presidential candidates coming out. You have Cornel West. Some people were angry with his statement in terms of making false equivalencies. RFK Jr.'s statement, which was full force Israel lobby talking points. Wherever you want to go in terms of your reactions to how politically the fallout has been since Palestine, the Palestinians began this Operation Al-Aqsa Flood.
Yeah, I think the thing I would emphasize is the extent to which Palestinians just don't care. And, Ben Gurion, the founder of the Israeli settler colony, the first prime minister of the settler colony, famously said one time, it was, I think, in a cabinet meeting, that he was told by some other minister, if we do this, the United Nations will pass a resolution against us. And he said, basically, to hell with the United Nations. What matters is not what the Goyim say. What matters is what the Jews do. And I think there is a mirror of that in Palestinian thinking. It doesn't matter anymore what the liberal West says or Western progressives say. What matters is what the Palestinian resistance does. Because frankly, all the sympathy, to the extent there's been much at all, from Western liberals has been absolutely worthless in changing the policies of Western governments and changing the conditions of the Palestinian people. And of course, the Western, so-called Western countries are responsible because they are the foundation on which the Israeli settler colony is armed and funded and so on. And I think that there is just a realization that, being the perfect, well-behaved victims has gotten Palestinians nowhere. And the lectures, the disgusting lectures Palestinians have been getting for years, like, oh, if you take inspiration from Gandhi, if you're just more like Gandhi, then the world will listen. I mean, there were horrible columns from Tom Friedman and Nick Kristof and those type of people for years saying that. Well, Palestinians did that. They said, okay, we'll try it. In 2018, the Great March of Return, tens, hundreds of thousands of Palestinian men, women, children, young, old, came out to protest, to rally for their rights at the Gaza border fence, completely unarmed. And Israel sent military snipers to maim and murder them in their thousands. Was there any reaction? Did the promised reaction from the reaction, the support that Tom Friedman and Nick Kristof had promised, did that materialize? No. There was silence. There was complicity. There was support for Israel murdering unarmed civilians with military snipers
Children,
across.
women.
Yeah. So what do you want
Yeah.
Palestinians to do? And now all the whining and crying. Palestinians don't have time to mourn their dead, the children that are murdered almost every day by the Israeli army across the West Bank. They don't have time to count their own dead. And Western liberals are demanding that they mourn for and sympathize with their colonizers and oppressors. Who else is in that situation? Certainly not Ukrainians, where every day you can read in the New York Times articles praising the plucky Ukrainians for all the ways they found to fight the Russians, articles praising car bombings of Russian officials, praising the murders of suspected collaborators, the articles praising Ukrainians for their inventiveness in taking commercial drones and turning them into weapons and so on. Where is all that for the Palestinian people? Of course, it doesn't exist. So why the hell should they care what Ilhan Omar or Cornel West or Robert F. Kennedy or any of these other clowns think? Because their support, to the extent that it's ever come, has added up to zero. That's the reality. And so I haven't seen a single Palestinian or a single commentator in Arab media say, oh, well, what are they saying in the West? What is Ilhan Omar saying? Nobody cares. Get over yourselves. Nobody cares.
Yeah, indeed. And then final point, in terms of the world political fallout outside of the West, I'm wondering your thoughts on, I feel like we were almost days away from a so-called Saudi-Israel normalization. There were reports that Saudi Arabia was about to increase its oil production to lower prices for the US for some kind of defense pact. This was Biden's signature achievement, or supposed to be a signature foreign policy achievement going into the election. That seems all but dead. There's supposed to be a corridor, the G20 announced, that's supposed to run through the region. And of course, we have, the difference between how Russia and China has responded to this conflict versus the West, where the West has all doubled down on Israel's side with aid, with all of this virtue signaling, and Russia and China, of course, calling for peace. What has been your reaction to the global fallout outside of the West, outside of the collective West?
What was the first part of your question? There was
Saudi Arabia and
that's
Israel
right.
were supposed to
Yeah, that's
normalize.
important.
That was
That's
in the
important.
works.
I want to comment on that. Um, the fantasy of the Saudi-Israeli normalization, as with the others, at least on the Israeli side, is that once we have normalization with all the Arab regimes, the Palestinian issue just goes away. It becomes irrelevant. The party goes on. And that's obviously untrue, but the momentous historic events of the 7th of October 2023 should put an end to that fantasy once and for all. Does that mean that the normalization with the Saudis won't go ahead? I think it may be delayed, but it probably will go ahead. But the point is, it doesn't change anything fundamental. It doesn't change the reality that Israel is a minority settler colony sitting on the volcano of a majority indigenous people that will not rest until they have their liberation and freedom. And no blessing from any Arab tyrant, any Arab client of the United States for Israel will change that reality. That's the message that has to be seared into the minds of Israelis and their sponsors. As for the wider world, I mean, I'm not naive about this. Russia has always been quite pro-Israel in many ways, and so to that extent, I was, I'd say, pleasantly surprised that the Russian government position was much better than I expected it would be in this circumstance. And I think, and that goes for China too, they got closer to talking about the fundamentals, is that basically the politics of condemnation get you nowhere, doesn't change the reality. It's just virtue signaling. If you want to end this horrific and escalating violence, and it will escalate further, then you have to deal with the root issues of it, which is the utter dispossession of the Palestinian people and the complete denial of their rights, especially their right to self-determination. And that, I think, is widely understood across the world. It is the bubble, the isolated United States and the isolated so-called West where that is not understood. And among its elites, because among the people, it's well understood. It's widely understood in Europe and even in the United States. The depth of understanding among ordinary people is far greater than it used to be. So Israel and its supporters are actually quite isolated, even though they try to make it look as if the world, quote unquote, world is on their side. No, it isn't. The world understands that Israel is an apartheid settler colony and its time is limited.
Well, Ali, you've been very generous with your time today. I really appreciate you coming on. Thanks so much for giving your insight into what I'm sure is going to be a rapidly developing situation with regards to the Palestinian resistance. But before you go, if there's anything that you want to promote, please do.
Yes, I think people can see my Twitter handle and or X handle. I don't know what we're supposed to say, and that of the Electronic Intifada, the publication that I am privileged to be part of. We have fantastic writers and analysts, and so please check us out at the Electronic Intifada. Just search for us. We also have great content on YouTube, and tomorrow we're actually going to do our first ever live stream, and we're hoping to get people on the ground who can come and provide insight on the situation. So come and find us and join us, and yeah, thank you for having me on and talking about this.
Of course, of course. Yes, your voice and that of Electronic Intifadas is well needed. I put the links all in the chat, so please do find them. And I will, of course, do the same for the YouTube channel. Ali, we'll be in touch. Have a good night and rest easy tonight, as easy as possible.
Thank you, Danny.
Take care. Good night. All right, everybody, stick around. There's still a lot more show to go. That it was Ali Abunimah, author, journalist, Palestinian American journalist. He is the co-founder of Electronic Intifada, good friend of the show. I think this is his third time on the show now, and he's a wealth of knowledge on this issue. So he was willing to give up to 45 minutes of his time on this later evening where he is at to give insight. And that was a really great conversation. Stick around, everyone. Here is the YouTube channel for Electronic Intifada. You want to catch that live stream tomorrow to learn more. Of course, I have 2 more stories to go. All right. So as you are coming in or continuing to watch, make sure you are hitting the like button, hitting the subscribe button, notifications bell. The like button helps boost the algorithm. I want to say hello to all the moderators. I want to say hello to everyone watching on Rumble and Rockfin. Welcome to the true independent media family out there. But of course, welcome to everyone watching on YouTube. We have still 3,700 viewers. Okay. And we will continue on. And be sure, of course, to keep those plugs in mind for Ali for tomorrow's live stream. I put the YouTube link in the chat again, and I will remind at the end of the stream. I have a couple more stories to go. Okay, I want to talk about Europe's situation post-Slovakia election of Robert Fico. And then I want to talk about Chuck Schumer and the delegation now in China by the United States and the differing treatment that they're getting as compared to other leaders who have made recent visits. So those are the next 2 stories. We should have some fun with these. All right. And I'm going to start in a minute or so as I prepare the way here. So give me just a few seconds as you bear with me. Hello to everybody. And one plug for me before I get into the stories, be sure to support this show on Patreon at patreon.com/Dhaiphong. That's the best way to support. Annual subscriptions available. That's where you get to submit questions, suggest guests and content. I was unable to ask Ali Abunimah Fahim's question about what organizations to donate to. However, I would definitely send you, Fahim, this is a Patreon member, to Ali's plugs. Go to Electronic Intifada and be sure to catch that stream tomorrow if you can, or even reach out because I think that they might be going over that during that stream. So with all of that said, I'm going to get started now on this story. The European Union is in big trouble, and that has been basically a foregone conclusion over the course of this conflict in Ukraine. The European Union has been the attack dog for the neocons based in Washington, essentially acting as the more publicly aggressive, yet arguably and obviously puny force militarily and politically in this situation, acting as a vassal to the United States all along the way. And of course, as this situation in Israel has taken people's attention maybe off of the conflict in Ukraine, we see a similar dynamic. The European governments, whether we're talking about outside of the European Union, the United Kingdom, or whether we're talking about France, whether we're talking about Germany, all of them stand steadfastly with Israel, mainly in part because of the US's influence. And the same has gone for Ukraine. And it's not a coincidence that Ukraine and its regime's leadership under Zelensky see themselves as another Israel, see themselves almost as the Israel of Europe, similar to how Colombia views itself as the Israel of South America, Latin America. But nonetheless, the big trouble for the European Union has been manyfold, and we're going to get into how that is manifesting in the current situation. But politically, we have seen leader after leader, Emmanuel Macron, Olaf Scholz, Rishi Sunak, who I guess you can say the United Kingdom is outside of the European Union, but still very much part of Europe, all of these leaders have seen their legitimacy, their popularity decline as this conflict has gone on. And that is because the situation on the ground, not in Ukraine, but in Europe, has deteriorated as support for Ukraine has escalated. So there was always going to be political fallout from this. It was just a matter of time, and it was just a matter of when. And I think we are starting to see the rudiments of that. Of course, we've seen protests after protests in places like the Czech Republic, like in Prague. We've seen protests all across Europe against this, in France, against NATO, against the continuation of sending more aid. But now we're seeing a political fallout a little bigger. So in Slovakia, Robert Fico has won the election there earlier in October. And Robert Fico is very much opposed. They call him pro-Russian in the collective West because he's very much opposed to continuing the aid that Slovakia has been giving to Ukraine. And that has actually occurred. There has been a halting of aid in Slovakia after Robert Fico's election win. Bratislava won't send more aid to Kiev as parties that oppose such support are in talks to form a new government. So this is from Politico. It says Slovakia's caretaker government said it has halted sending further military aid to Ukraine as political parties that oppose such support are in talks to form a coalition following last weekend's election. The outgoing bureaucratic government in Slovakia will not send any more military material to Ukraine, the government spokesman said. The country's defense ministry was considering sending a new package of aid. Former Prime Minister Robert Fico's leftist populist smear party smear party. I'm probably butchering that. I do not speak this part of Europe's language well, or any part of Europe's for that matter, won the parliamentary election last Saturday after promising to stop sending weapons to Ukraine to block Kiev's potential NATO membership and oppose sanctions on Russia. Slovakia President Zuzana Kaputova on Monday said asked Fico to try to form a coalition government. He has until mid-October to do so. The decision about this issue should reflect the outcome of the parliamentary elections and should follow the outcome of the government formation talks which are taking place these days, said a spokesperson for Kaputova. A decision about the provision of military assistance at this particular moment will create a precedent for future changes of political power. Fico was forced to resign as prime minister in 2018 following massive protests in the country over the murder of an investigative journalist. So he is back. He hails from the left in Slovakia. Some have said he's more populist, that he's more eclectic. But regardless, it's this position that has placed the European Union on notice and has really begun what I think is a cascade effect, or will be a cascade effect politically in the EU regarding their support for Ukraine. But now I'm going to put on friend of the show, Scott Ritter, what he had to say about this development. Here is his 2-minute topic video on the victory of Robert Fico and what it means for the European Union. Let's take a listen.
Observers based upon is the European Union in trouble? Well, according to some observers, based upon the victory of Robert Fico, the former Prime Minister of Slovakia, who ran and has emerged victorious in the recent elections, there are dark clouds on the horizon for European Union, for NATO, and for Ukraine. Why? Because Robert Fico has said Slovakia comes first. He is tired of Slovakia giving away money to the European Union, which is then sent to an endless war in Ukraine, when this money could be better spent at home in Slovakia in the interest of the Slovakian people. He's also, frankly speaking, a little bit sympathetic to the Russian position. He doesn't find that Russia's special military operation is the egregious violation of international law, this war of aggression that NATO and other European Union members have said it is. And frankly speaking, Fico draws strength from the example of Viktor Orban, neighboring Hungary, who has stood up to the European Union and NATO and the United States when it comes to Russia, the special military operation, and supporting the anti-Russian policies of the European Union. So if Fico is able to assemble a coalition, his party only won 22% of the votes, but if he can cobble together a coalition within the next 2 weeks, then he's prime minister, and his policies will be at the forefront in European Union, the United States, and NATO, we left wondering, is this just the beginning of a populist wave that seems to be sweeping through Europe that rejects the pro-Ukrainian, pro-American, anti-European stance that the European Union has embraced over the course of the past decades? We'll see. It appears that he does have support amongst other parties, and he will be able to build these, but it's hard to predict the future. What an interesting time it is. At a time when NATO, the United States, and the European Union speak of unprecedented unity, we're starting to see deep fractures in the actual unity of Europe. Hungary, Slovakia, who's next? Poland has elections just over the horizon.
So that is what Scott Ritter had to say, and I think that it is very apt because there is, right? It's not just a matter of Slovakia or Poland or Hungary, these countries that are now moving further away from the European Union orbit. It's also that even the steadfast, staunch loyalists in the European Union are struggling mightily. They're struggling mightily out of their support for Ukraine. This analogy has been used many, many times now. They've shot themselves in the foot and many feet. They don't have any toes left. They're not really standing. There was once a time when countries like Germany, for example, were seen as the hope and the light of what Europe would be in the modern era, the end of the 20th century, the end of the Cold War into the 21st century. Germany and countries in Europe formed the European Union as a way to almost show off what it meant to live in the post-Soviet era without so-called authoritarian communism looming just next door. But all of it has been destroyed, and they have no one to blame but themselves, because while on the one hand you could call them vassals and puppets of the United States, on the other, they have made very cold and calculated choices, i.e., and for example, e.g., maybe I should say, e.g., allowing Nord Stream to be blown up. So the situation in particular with Germany as the leader of the European project at this moment is so incredibly dire that it has the potential to really just shake up how Europe is configured. And it's all because Germany and all of the other European countries that have gambled on Ukraine have essentially lost that gamble. And they've done so on behalf of the United States as master now. And so I want to go over Germany. What's going on with Germany? Germany predicted to be the only major European economy to contract this year as recession lingers. So this is a recent report from September. But as I read this report, mind you, this report is underestimating. They're trying to make it look optimistic that Germany is the only one. But as you read in the reports, as is per usual for the collective West mainstream media, how it usually is when there's a misleading headline or a kind of twisted headline, the content itself will say something a little bit different. So it says that the largest economy in Europe is expected to contract 0.4 this year. That's 0.6 percentage points lower than an estimate made in May. The European Commission also cut its growth expectations for Germany in 2024 from 1.4% to 1.1%. The latest forecasts point to a general slowdown across the region. So that's not as optimistic as the headline purports. The headline is saying that Germany is the only country that's going to contract. But the reality is that they're all stagnating and facing the possibility of contraction. And it's likely that actually over the last 2 quarters, Germany is actually going to, by the time this quarter ends, this economic quarter ends, Germany will have actually contracted by 1% over the last 2. So it says Germany is set for a prolonged recession this year, the only major European economy to experience economic contraction during 2023, according to fresh forecasts of the European Commission, the executive arm of the EU. Europe's largest economy is predicted to post a 0.4% fall in economic activity this year. That's 0.6% lower than an estimate made in May, according to the Commission, which published new forecasts Monday. The institution also cut its growth expectations for Germany in 2024 from 1.4% to 1.1%. So that's not good. 2024 ain't here yet. And the winter is coming, and a lot of this has to do with, of course, energy shortages. The German economy has struggled in the wake of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, with Berlin having to very quickly end years of energy dependency on the Kremlin. The International Monetary Fund said in July that Germany would likely contract by 0.3% this year, as I said. So, look, whose fault is it that Germany has had to quickly become independent of Russian energy, Russian gas and oil? It has to do, especially gas, has to do with the United States. The United States is to blame. The United States blew up Nord Stream, and Germany not only let it happen, but nodded all along the way. So top economists have dubbed the traditional economic powerhouse as the sick man of Europe. The concept was coined back in 1998 when Germany faced economic challenges, but now it's being resurfaced as Berlin registers deep declines in output. Data released in September showed manufacturing activity in the country falling at its strongest pace since June 2009, excluding the COVID-19 pandemic. Other economists disagree that Germany's current woes can be compared to prior downturns. Germany's situation today differs crucially from 1995 to 2004. First, Germany enjoys record employment, high demand for labor, and the most comfortable fiscal position in all major economies. That makes it easier to adjust to shocks. So that's an optimist. That's very much optimistic. However, those jobs are likely to go away and are already going away because of the massive deindustrialization that is occurring in Germany. So here's the overall situation in Europe. The latest economic forecasts point to a general slowdown. The 27 EU economies are expected to grow at an average pace of 0.8%. Mind you, they're not talking about Russia, which is actually going to double that, likely 2 to 3% growth over that same period. So they're not talking about how Russia is doing better than Europe, despite Europe being the one leveling hundreds, thousands of sanctions onto Russia. This is down from a 1% estimate in May. Going into next year, the picture is more downbeat than previously forecast. The European Union is expected to grow by 1.4% rather than 1.7%. Weakness in demand, in particular consumption, shows that high and still increasing consumer prices for goods and services are taking a heavier toll than expected. High inflation continues to be one of the challenges for the bloc. The latest forecast shows that consumer prices will come down in the coming months, but they are still likely to be above the central bank's target of 2% by the end of 2024. Headline inflation in the euro area, where 20 EU nations share the same currency, is seen at 5.6% at 2023, and then 2.9% at 2024. So prices are high. And of course, this contradicts this whole idea that you can just adjust to shocks by being employed. If you're employed and you are not making enough money to pay for the things that you need, then your employment is not really the source of your security anymore. You are working for a lot less. And that is what, of course, the Western economists don't want to talk about. It warned that price pressures might drag on for longer, as the European Central Bank is due to meet Thursday and announce whether it is raising interest rates again. The central bank has, since July of 2022, increased rates by 4.25% in an attempt to bring down historically high inflation in the region. So, and that has led to the recession. Okay, that a lot of that. I mean, there are, of course, core economic factors that lead to economic stagnation and contraction. Mainly, of course, being the fact that there is a whole lot of closures, deindustrialization happening because of less demand. But that decreased demand is the result of the energy crisis. It's also the result of years of austerity, where finance has been privileged over industry, and the fact that when that starts to happen, you begin to have the issue of wages not being high enough to keep up with not just rising costs, but also with just the status quo. So the inflation only piles on to what is a general reality, a cyclical reality for Western capital. But with that said, okay, I'll show you the updated situation. So that was a kind of a review, a prediction. But here is the Eurozone economy is likely contracted this quarter. So even right now, as we're speaking, it says the Eurozone is likely to contract this quarter and won't return to growth anytime soon, a survey showed, as the dampening effect of central banks' long campaign of interest rate rises becomes clearer. So the HCOB's Flash Euro Composite Managers Index (PMI), compiled by S&P Global and seen as a gauge for overall economic health, rose to 47.1% in September from August 33rd 33-month low of 46.7. The reading was still below the 50 mark, separating growth from contraction. However, the Hamburg Commercial Bank said the bloc's economy would contract 0.4% this quarter, far worse than the flatlining predicted in a recent Reuters poll. A recession is becoming increasingly clear in the euro area. Unlike in the winter of 2022-2023, the economic weakness is not concentrated in Germany, which has suffered particularly bad from high energy prices. The increase in the ECB key interest rate by 450 basis points in the meantime is slowing down the economy in all euro countries. Although 2 years of unprecedented global policy tightening may have reached peak, major central banks have served notice that they will keep interest rates high and as high as needed to defeat inflation. The impact is now being clearly felt with shrinking business activity in Germany, Europe's largest economy, pointing to a contraction there due to a sustained decline in demand for goods and services. But they say supply and demand. What this means is that wages, this is always happens under global capitalism, but wages now cannot sustain the impact of these higher prices, of this inflation. And then you have the interest rates being they rise, they're being increased because they're trying to stifle people's consumption. Do not want to take out loans. They don't want to invest. They don't want a house. They don't want these things if the interest rates are high. I mean, we're all going through that, I think, in the audience. You tell me. But you don't want to buy a home. You don't want to buy a car. You don't want to buy assets, real tangible wealth. You don't want to build it if interest rates are high. This goes for business as well. So meanwhile, France's dominant services sector contracted at even sharper pace in September as falls in demand and new orders weighed in on the Eurozone's second biggest economy. In Britain, outside the EU, companies endured a much tougher September than feared, marked by growing unemployment and recession risks. So again, on and on and on and on and on. Risk, recession. That is the situation for Europe, and it's going to have a political fallout. Indeed, it already is having a political fallout. Now, one of the things that Europe has attempted to do in order to make up for the complete and utterly suicidal policy it has pursued toward Russia is that it's trying to hedge its bets with China. On the one hand, the EU, European countries, the UK outside of the EU, and to be fair, there really isn't that much difference between what the UK does and what the EU does. The separation is very, very slim, if nil, when it comes to Russia and China. But as the EU has been aggressively pursuing a suicidal policy against Russia, it has attempted to balance a contradictory policy toward China. On the one hand, de-risking, probing, talking about how Chinese economic influence is malign and is harming the Eurozone, is harming their respective economies, while at the same time basically coming on their hands and knees, the European Union, attempting to restore relations so that they don't further decline and further go into a spiral into the abyss. And here you have Josep Borrell. He's coming back. He's coming back. So I don't know if you remember, and I'll pull it up in a bit, but Josep Borrell was actually supposed to visit China earlier in the summer. He was supposed to visit China right around the end of spring, early summer. And that visit was canceled. And it was canceled because relations with the European Union had reached a new low. But here you have Josep Borrell is going to China, expecting to enhance exchanges and ease doubts. Or at least that's what China is saying, that this is what it's supposed to do. So the China and the EU are expected to seek more exchanges, clear away some mistrust, and mend spats under Brussels' de-risking approach ahead of the China-EU summit. Chinese experts said on Saturday, after an EU official confirmed that the EU foreign policy chief, Josep Borrell, will head to China next week after previously postponing the trip twice. And there were a lot of rumors that, especially the June visit that was planned, that actually was China did not want to see him. An EU official who has not been named disclosed on Friday that EU's top diplomat will visit China from the 12th to the 14th of October, according to the AFP. Borrell will meet Wang Yi, China's foreign minister, to discuss bilateral relations as well as foreign policy and security issues. It comes after Brussels started a probe into China's electric vehicle subsidies, which China's Ministry of Commerce expressed strong dissatisfaction and firm opposition to on Wednesday. Brussels' approach of balancing its concerns over relying too much on Beijing while maintaining ties will likely be at the heart of Borrell's upcoming discussions with Chinese officials. Wang Yi, also a member of the Politburo of the Communist Party of China Central Committee, welcomed Borrell's attendance of the strategic dialogue during their phone call in August. Analysts believe that during his Beijing visit, Borrell aims to attend the China-EU strategic dialogue, one of the three pillars of China-EU relations, and prepare for the China-EU summit. Li Haidong, professor at China Foreign Affairs University, told Global Times that the focus of Borrell's visit will likely be on strategic communication cooperation, clearing the way for exchanges in various fields such as economy, energy, people-to-people exchanges, and increasing trust on issues of mutual concern. Despite its desire for more autonomy in economic matters, the EU has been kidnapped by the U.S. on security issues and has had to take into account the strategic competition between the U.S. and China, which Europe has a broad and common interests with. China hopes that promoting strategic coordination and cooperation with the EU, Europe will become more powerful and influential on the global stage so that the global strategic pattern will be more balanced, instead of the Europe being held hostage by the US. That's a goal shared by China and Europe. Maybe. This is where I might differ with China a bit. Because if we are to be quite honest, if we are to be honest about the situation with the European Union, it is unclear whether the European Union, European countries truly want to be more influential. I think there is a struggle. We see that with France and the US, lots of spats. We see that, for example, in Niger. We saw that with regard to China when Macron went off script and went against the US's hostile policy on the question of Taiwan. So we've seen this, and we've seen this over the course of recent history. So sure, there are some divisions, but at the same time, it is unclear whether in the final analysis, European leaders are really prepared to take a leap of true autonomy from their US masters. I'm not so sure about that. So China hopes to work together with the EU to maintain the stability of relations and address global challenges together. And the full resumption of in-person exchanges between China and the EU started only in the first half of 2023, and the EU's misunderstanding and negative sentiments on China need to be gradually eased. So this is China's position. Okay. On September 25th, you had Chinese and EU officials holding high-level economic and trade dialogues in person in Beijing for the first time since the pandemic, with a new series of agreements in various areas reached. On Tuesday, the European Parliament approved a new trade instrument to enable the EU to respond to economic blackmail from a foreign country, which could be used by China hawks against Beijing. So the mixed and self-contradictory moves and signals from the EU reflect the mentality under the de-risking approach taken by Ursula von der Leyen, the EU president of the European Commission. This is an unelected, mind you, Miss Ursula. She is not elected. She's a selected leader, and that's the contradiction that is going to really play out here. The European Union needs China. I mean, the European Union cannot play the US's game against China. They can't do that. That will sabotage the EU's economy forever. I mean, there would be no coming back. But on the other hand, Europe, as we've seen with Russia, has been more than willing to, with all intents and purposes, and with no other better way to describe it, has been willing to chop its, pull the rug from out under itself, shoot themselves in the foot, all feet, take a bat to the knees. All of this has relevancy when it comes to Europe's policy toward Russia and China. So we'll see what happens, but China hopes that the EU will further clarify its concept of de-risking. Does it regard China as a risk, or does it regard the problems faced by China in Europe as a risk? Regarding China as a risk is not the proper way to treat a strategic partner. China and EU relations should have principle and main tone rather than being divided into cooperation, competition, and confrontation, which will never lead to a balance. It's possible that some areas of cooperation will be drawn into the track of competition or even confrontation when the EU is exaggerating security in a one-sided way. Dealing with the probe into electric vehicle subsidies could be a litmus test. If the two sides can resolve the issue through technological and political consultations, it will not only resolve economic frictions, but also enhance mutual political trust. If some European politicians, however, want the EU's China policy to change the EU's China policy traditions or just flex muscles, China-EU ties could remain unstable for a while. And so I honestly don't think China has many hopes here. I do believe that they will have candid and frank discussions about the probing and the hostilities and the rhetoric um, that's come out of Europe in the EU in particular, especially Ursula von der Leyen. If you remember during Macron's visit, the joint visit, Macron and Ursula von der Leyen earlier this year, you remember what happened? She had to be put in a separate room. She had to go through security like everyone else. China was not happy. And indeed, China still isn't happy. But all of this goes back to the point that Europe is really on a suicidal path here. And it's going to continue to have political consequences, whether it's Robert Fico being elected and the whole Ukraine aid situation becoming more and more tenuous as NATO countries, the EU, run out of gas, run out literally because of their sanctions against Russia, but really run out of military gas, not really having nothing to supply to the Ukraine effort, that proxy war project. And as that continues to happen, as the economic situation deteriorates into the winter, it's going to be interesting to see whether something like the Israeli-Palestinian row, the Palestinian resistance to Israel, or whether it's some other global conflagration ends up de facto leading and pressuring forces in the collective West to begin to tie the knot on the Ukraine project in some way, whether it's a West buffer zone, a West Ukrainian buffer zone, some kind of conflict freeze, whether it's regime change in Kiev, getting rid of Zelensky via elections, or maybe some kind of selection process, assassination or displacement or some kind of arrangement. But I think all of these factors, all of these considerations, right? The economic situation in Europe, the fact that the United States is also having a lot of problems domestically, economically. The US economy, of course, is not the healthiest, but it's still riding on Europe's back. But at the same time, with inflation still pretty poor in the US, with an election season coming up, with heavy and tough rhetoric coming from the GOP about Ukraine as an election issue, with Kevin McCarthy's ouster, with the fact that further Ukraine aid has been delayed and delayed and delayed after this failed counteroffensive, it's likely that the political conditions in Europe and the broader collective West are kind of coming to a close on the Ukraine crisis, on the Ukraine proxy war project that they have provoked and, of course, developed and nurtured over the course of the last not just year and a half, 2 years, but, of course, since the Ukraine conflict, or at least this iteration of it, really began in 2014. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. The point here, though, is that the European Union, the UK, tagging right along, it's on a suicidal course. And that course is having political ramifications. And I think many people have probably been saying, finally. However, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. A lot of people thought Giorgia Meloni in Italy was going to be a stalwart of opposition against the war on Russia. And here she is, exiting from the Belt and Road Initiative, while at the same time doing whatever the United States wants when it comes to Ukraine, being the first to be called to discuss what to do about Ukraine. If you don't remember the list of countries that Biden called after the failed House vote in Congress, Biden called a few countries to try to consider, mull over. I don't know what they were really talking about, but Italy was on there. So it's going to be interesting to see how Slovakia and how, especially the further east you go in Europe, Poland, how things are going to shape out from here on end. We see the divorce with Poland. We see Slovakia changing. There's a lot going on, and we'll just have to keep our eye out for it. But we know the trajectory Europe is on, and that is disaster and catastrophe. that only the people of Europe, only working people in Europe in particular, can change. Only they can demand that their governments change their tune, or that perhaps a new government is needed. Perhaps a new kind of leadership is needed. That is what is really on the table right now. And we are going to see what happens in the very near future. We're not talking months and years. We're talking weeks. We're talking that as each week goes by, as each new election occurs, as each new spill up and hiccup with the Ukraine conflict occurs, there is more change likely on the way. All right, everyone. So that's the end of that story. And I have just one more to go before I head out. So for those who are just coming in, you can catch the replay in the beginning to catch my conversation with Ali Abunimah. And then I will close after the next story. So a few announcements first, of course, before I get started on the very final last story. So before I get to the last story, be sure you're hitting that like button. I think we're doing pretty good there. Let's see, 1865 likes. Yeah. So keep hitting that like button if you have not already. Helps boost the stream. Keep subscribing to the channel if you have not yet. If you're new to the channel, hit that notifications bell. And of course, in the video description, there are all kinds of ways you can support this show. There's Patreon, which is the best way. Annual and monthly memberships available. That is the best place to support my work. You can also subscribe on Substack for free or paid membership. Free membership for notifications, paid membership for archives of articles, as well as the ability for the comment section and to suggest questions and get similar perks. YouTube membership is also available, and I saw a new YouTube member who I'll shout out at the end. Of course, there are one-time options, PayPal. There's a Buy Me a Coffee, which is newer for me. And of course, I want to say one more time, hello to the Rockfin community. Hello to the Rumble community. Thank you so much for supporting my work on an independent basis and giving me a platform there. With all that said, though, we have one more story to go, and I'm going to get to that in a second, but also to say that this will likely be my second to last, if not my last stream before I head off to Vietnam in T-minus 4 days. So I'm going to Vietnam October 12th, and I won't be returning until the end of October, so you will not see me live likely. I don't think I can trust phone service out there to really do me justice on live streams by my phone, because I'm not going to be bringing my laptop there. I want to keep myself a little more mobile, so I'm going to use a mobile setup, but I will do pre-recorded videos, hopefully get some commentary up, original commentary, if I can find some time to get away to talk about recent developments in the world, but also hopefully get some interviews with folks. I'm hoping to connect with a few people out there, see some things, show you some Vietnam. And there's a lot going on. Biden was just there early September, and Xi Jinping is coming to Vietnam probably right after I leave. So a lot of geopolitical events there to discuss, and that's what I will hopefully be doing in part with all of you while going with the delegation to talk about the war, the legacy, very pertinent now with Ukraine, with what's happening with Palestine, very pertinent stuff. So I'll be doing that with the Veterans for Peace delegation, and you won't see me live in this kind of setup until early November. With that said, everybody, please do. Somebody said we need to fund a mobile Starlink system for Danny. Yeah, please. If you have any suggestions, of course, put them in a super chat if you want to help out with the cause, because I'm still building my mobile setup, especially, and that does take money. And so that's part of why I ask for support on Patreon and the other places. So video description is available. Of course, I appreciate all the super chats and every other way that you support, whether it's free or otherwise. But I'm going to get to the last topic. Okay, last topic here. It's going to be a fun one. This one is more this one is more about politics and diplomacy. All right. because I really do like to focus on that. I know there's a lot of war, military conflict going on. That's why at Ali Abunimah, that's why I talk about Ukraine so much here. But politics is really my area of specialty. And so I'm going to get to this last story, all right? Chuck Schumer is in China. He's traveled to China. He was supposed to have arrived, I believe it's October 7th. So Chuck Schumer is going to China, and it's part of an ongoing attempt by the United States to engage in what looks like diplomacy. And why do I say it like that? Is because the United States has been faking diplomacy with China for, I don't know, the last 6 months. Antony Blinken traveled to China, and right after that, Biden called Xi Jinping a dictator. Janet Yellen went to China. Right before she went, the U.S. slapped a travel warning on China to the United States, basically saying to Americans, don't travel to China because you're unsafe. So on and on and on, right? There have been just numerous attempts by the United States to balance diplomacy with aggression literally at the same time. Gina Raimondo was one of the more recent visits, and she went, and everything seemed great. Gina Raimondo was there, Commerce Secretary, talking about trade, and of course, they didn't talk about the blacklists and the sanctions. The U.S. side refused to do that, but on areas where they are cooperating still, things seem to have gone well. And even Gina Raimondo said things are going well. Well, right after she returned, she went to the Western mainstream media and said she was very disappointed in the Huawei Mate 60 Pro's release and how it showed that China had built basically an advanced phone, one that competes with the latest version of the iPhone with all of its own advanced semiconductor and other forms of technology. So this has been a rolling case of fake diplomacy for the United States. And who's to say and who is to believe that this is different, right? Chuck Schumer, he is known as being a warmonger, as being someone who supports the Cold War heavily. He is one of the Democrats in Congress who has been a staunch supporter of the U.S.'s role in instigating the Ukraine conflict. So here's Schumer, and here's what the Global Times had to say. Schumer's China visit continues momentum of high-level delegations, high-level contacts. And here you see a picture, and I'm going to get into why these pictures speak so many words, 1,000, 100,000. I'll show you a little bit. But here's what the Global Times said. It said a bipartisan delegation of senators led by Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer arrived in Shanghai on Saturday while expressing hope that the visit would be an opportunity for U.S. politicians to gain more understanding of China. Some analysts said that Schumer's visits is more about aligning with the Biden administration's recent tactical adjustments to enhance engagement with China. They called on the U.S. to take more action to improve complicated bilateral relations rather than add obstacles. A detailed itinerary of the delegation's trip in China has not been released, but Schumer reportedly meet with senior Chinese officials in Shanghai and Beijing. According to some media, the delegation will also visit South Korea and Japan with the goal of advancing U.S. economic and national security interests. Schumer's journey to China, which is the first congressional visit to the nation since 2019, has particular significance for U.S.-China ties. Schumer has long been a critic of China and supported several unfavorable laws. In light of the recent complicated situation, the trip demonstrated the need to continue communication between China and the U.S., said Sun Changhao, a fellow and head of the U.S.-EU program at the Center for International Security and Strategy at Tsinghua University, told the GT. The Chinese foreign ministry said on Wednesday that China welcomed Schumer's visit and hopes that it will contribute to a more objective understanding of China in U.S. Congress, increase dialogue and communication between the two countries' legislatures, and add positive factors to growing U.S.-China relations. China always taking the high road. While my voice always remains suspicious because I haven't seen any record of change yet. So during his stay, Schumer may discuss the possibility of approving legislative exchange between China and the U.S., and also update his understanding of China to make preparations for another comprehensive competition bill against China. Moreover, as a Democrat, Schumer may help the Biden administration in gathering information on China's attitude during the visit. In May, Senate Democrats, led by Schumer, launched a renewed effort to create a bill dubbed China Competition 2.0 to limit the flow of technology to China. Senators from both parties are visiting the group, including Republican Senator Mike Crapo, a senior member of his party of the Senate Finance Committee 2 additional Democratic senators and 2 Republican senators. Domestic politics in the upcoming election are also reasons for the senators to join the delegation, and some think they will use the occasion to talk about issues involving China, as Micron Technology's capacity to conduct business in China, some experts said. Before the visit, Schumer's office said on Tuesday that he planned to talk to Chinese officials about human rights concerns about fentanyl and China's role in the international community. It is not unexpected that Schumer will bring up these issues given bipartisan consensus to maintain competitiveness and a tough stance toward China. And the extreme division of U.S. politics has also encouraged hardliners to criticize other politicians with various degrees of anti-China sentiment. So basically what this is saying is this delegation is coming there not just to talk about cooperation and niceties and how can we work together and how can you see China and change their minds. That was in the beginning of the report. The end of the report says, oh, well, Schumer might be studying. Schumer might have nefarious goals, might be looking to send information to the Biden administration on how to reduce the ability of China to develop technologically. And also that this may have to do with electoral purposes, which I think it 100% does. I think that the reason why these so-called bilateral visits, these so-called diplomatic visits have gone so badly is because Joe Biden, the Democrats, but really the entirety of Washington's neocon, I almost said neocolonial, although it wouldn't be inaccurate, neocon foreign policy establishment, they want to look as if they are talking and speaking with the country that they are not yet engaged in a full-on proxy war with yet, although you could make the argument around Taiwan, but a full-on proxy war, which is hot and leading to open hostilities. So they want to look the part while also establishing electorally a tough on China stance. And what better way to do that than to go face to face with your adversary and come out of it talking a big game? And that is what has happened every single time. It is to court and champion and try to recruit the anti-China forces, not just in Washington, but also amongst the U.S. voting population. It is electoral virtue signaling. But China doesn't care. And the reason why China behaves in this way, right, conducting these visits, is because China also has a diplomatic reputation. It has a line, it has a policy of non-interference, but also win-win cooperation and not discriminating against any country's leadership on the basis of politics. And so China is saying, well, we will continue to do the dance. We will continue to dance with the United States so long as there are any benefits coming from the U.S. side. And there still is a massive relationship of over $700 billion worth. However, you can see the difference in what China and how China treats certain countries versus others through a picture. So as you saw in that Global Times article, there was a picture, but here's friend of the show, Jingjing Li. She posted a picture, and I just want to show you. Zoom in a little bit on that picture. Do you notice anything? Well, you might notice how they all look like exactly how you would expect a congressional delegation to look like. Old, white, and completely out of touch. But do you notice anything about the background? Is there anything special going on? There's no red carpet. There's no, it looks like they're just pulling up into an airport terminal, taking a picture in the wind. There isn't any niceties there. There isn't any special treatment. There isn't any, let's say, huge acts of respect on display for the U.S. side. Not a lot of enthusiasm from China is what I am getting at. And so I want to show you the difference. So Bashar al-Assad, Syria's president, was recently in China. And I want to show you the difference because it is really different. Here's Al Monitor saying, red carpet, honor guard, and flowers. Syria's Assad receives a lavish welcome in China. And so look at the difference. That's the photo. Look at the red carpet. This was a media moment. Schumer's visit isn't a media moment. And you know, the American exceptionalist, Schumer himself, the whole congressional delegation, Ali Abunimah said on this show, they view themselves as superior. Israel does, but the United States has this complex probably more than any country in the world. And of course, it's hard to compare, but the United States, given its hegemon status, has certainly that view of itself, that it is superior, right? There is not one person in the political establishment, I don't care how far left they are, I don't care how far right they are, they all come together. Elon Omar and Mike Pompeo, where do they come together on? The US is the best country in the world, superior to all others. And that is, I think, a stark look at this message. Look at this message that China is sending. Look at the picture. All right. And I'm going to show you a video now. I'm going to show you a video of how Bashar al-Assad, and his wife, First Lady of Syria, were treated. Because there's a beautiful video here, compilation I'm going to play. So it's a loud song. I'm going to keep it on mute, I think, because we don't need the music. It's very loud and dramatic. But I just want to show you the optics here, okay? So here we go. So there you see the whole thing, performances, the flags together, red carpet, flying in on Air China. I don't know if you noticed this, because Syria is under massive sanctions. That is an Air China plane. Here are Chinese officials greeting Bashar al-Assad. Look at the smiles. Look at just the different atmosphere. This country, the U.S. is at war with Syria. The U.S. is at war. Look at the children dancing, cheering. Look at this is a political statement, if there was any. The old, crusty neocons did not get this treatment. All right, they did not. Look at this. Look at that. It's a show. It's a whole performance. This took coordination. If you know anything about China, they can put on things real fast. But this was a whole performance, all right? So there you have that, all right? But it's not just Syria. I mean, Syria, of course, is maybe the latest example. But I can also show you Nicolas Maduro, Venezuela, another country. So Syria, beleaguered, at war, essentially, with the United States for many years by proxy. The United States sending armed fighters through its own client regimes in the region, Israel being one of them too. But since 2011, of course, Syria's had conflict with the U.S. since before then, but since 2011, major armed escalation sponsored by the United States, and now these crippling sanctions after what was an embarrassing military defeat by NATO in Syria. These crippling sanctions continue. The propaganda continues. There was just a murder by these same militants armed and funded by the U.S. and its client regimes. They just murdered people in Syria. I believe it was Homs, and that this still happens to this day. So this is the message that China is sending, right? And I'm going to show you Venezuela, because Venezuela is also under attack by the United States. Sanctions, crippling sanctions, and also what has been at times guarimbas, which are essentially armed proxy conflicts. These upsurges, these millions of dollars from the National Endowment for Democracy have gone to Venezuela to arm far-right fascistic groups to overthrow the government there, killing people. And so I'm gonna also keep this on mute as well, because the music, I'll just talk through it. And here you see the treatment of Nicolas Maduro, Venezuela, when he went to China. This was earlier, late September. Assad went early September. Maduro went, and here you have the treatment there. I mean, the whole 9 yards here, right? Camera moment, meeting Xi Jinping outside the Great Hall of the People. Red carpet out, okay? The whole motorcade, everything. Camera moment, shaking hands in public, right? This is a whole public camera moment, one by one. As you can see, it's a whole celebration. It's a whole celebration here between China, and there you see the Venezuelan delegation. And there you have it. There's the red carpet treatment for Nicolas Maduro in China, and that was covered by CCTV. So it's just a different vibe here. Different vibe. The wives of the presidents, the first ladies, on and on and on. It's just a different vibe. You're not going to see this. The military performances. I mean, it goes on and on and on. All right. So there you have it. And you wonder why, right? And I'll explain why this is the case. Let me explain why this is the case after we watch. I mean, this is a long video, as you can see. This was not just a basic moment, but I think you get the gist there of just how much it meant for um the how much it meant for Venezuela and Syria to come to China, send delegations, and send their heads of state, versus when the United States sends its major um, leaders. Now, mind you, the United States can't even get Biden to China because China doesn't want to meet with Biden right now. There was hopes that would happen at the sidelines of the G20. Xi Jinping said, "I'm not going to the G20." Joe Biden has been attempting to meet with Xi Jinping. There was reports earlier, a few months ago, they're not taking calls. So China is willing to meet with U.S. delegations. They're totally open to increasing people-to-people exchanges. I was just on one. But when it comes to heads of state, like state visits, official state visits, China and the U.S. are not ready to have one. And it's all because of the United States. This is the U.S. is doing. The U.S. is, through its policy of so-called containment with China, simply isolating itself. Because China's not isolated. Look at those performances. You don't think that Venezuela and Syria appreciate that? You don't think the global South watches when they see such a thing? It's Zambia has gotten this same treatment. Cambodia, all of these countries get some form of this treatment, even if some maybe get a little bit bigger of a performance than others, but it really isn't a hierarchy. They all, in some way, get very special treatment. And it's because China is embracing the global South, which it is a part, in which the Western mainstream media continues to try to say, oh, well, China is trying to court the global South, as if it's outside of the global South. No, China has a long history of being a country with a similar situation, a similar development process to the global South. Underdeveloped, impoverished. Why? Because foreign powers decided to mess around and now they're finding out that when you colonize, destroy, pillage, and plunder, it will be eventually you that is isolated, especially when you can't seem to correct your behavior. You just find a new way of doing it. And that's what the United States is doing to China. It cannot admit that it has lost. It can admit that China is not going to fall. Certainly, its dreams of integrating China into capitalism so that it could destroy China's socialist governance system, so that it could change its political system, that is all fantasy now. They can't do it in Russia. They certainly can't do it in China. All they do is continue to strengthen the partnership between these two countries. Look at how China and Russia responded to the Palestine situation. They didn't come in support of Israel. Russia certainly has deep ties with Israel. So does China. No, they came out with it was a neutral response, and some would quibble about the two-state solution. Is it viable? But regardless of whether you think that's viable or not, they went with international law, they went with protocol, and they made a strong message of saying, hey, this is a conflict that needs to be resolved by peaceful measures, and we are going to be part of that peaceful process. And China and Russia have been doing that all along, not just with Palestine, but with the wider multipolar world. And that is what frightens the U.S. so much. And the United States now, with this congressional delegation, it's going to be a nothing burger. Whether you see this video as it's happening or whether you see it later in a clip, it's a big nothing burger. It won't produce any results. Just like Josep Borrell's visit won't really yield any other results than what already is on the table, which probably is economic agreements, because Europe can't de-risk and decouple from China. That is suicidal talk. That is ridiculous talk. So there is a situation brewing, okay? There is a situation brewing when it comes to China, and that is that the United States has essentially isolated itself. It has destroyed itself in this situation. It's never going. I don't. It's never going to have the relationship it had with China following normalization, opening up and reform period. That those days are over, where cooperation was smooth, where there wasn't maybe especially in the wild '90s period, 1990 to 2000, where there wasn't a global conflict, there wasn't a Cold War, there wasn't a Sino-Soviet split, so China-U.S. relations exploded. There was lots of expats going there. The economic investment ramped up, and there was very little, especially after Tiananmen in the 1989, especially after that, little conflict between the two. Tiananmen, of course, was a really big conflict, which the United States tried to attempt to support a color revolution in China, which failed disastrously and led to George Soros's and the Soros Foundation's ouster from China. But I digress. The point here is that those days are over, where China is going to cater to and attempt to simply go along with the United States as long as it can in order to make sure that relationship is as stable as possible. China has learned that both success, integration into the world economy, and rapid economic development can actually protect you and give you opportunities to become not just more self-reliant, but also more assertive. So that's what this is all about. When you see the crusty old congressional neocons go to China and basically get the, oh, you're here, great, treatment. It's like when you have a staff meeting at work, or when you have the boss wants everyone to meet. Sometimes they want everyone to meet regularly. It's like when that happens, and the workers show up a little late. They don't really care. It's like, the boss are like, oh, you showed up, great. Like that's kind of how it is here with China and the United States. It's like, oh yeah, you showed up, that's fine. Like, okay, are you going to do anything different? Are you going to change how you work? Are you going to increase your work ethic toward peace? Are you going to help out a little bit more? Maybe be more productive? No, that's not going to happen. And China knows that. This is the situation. China is the target, the principal target of U.S. foreign policy. And these visits only serve for China as just increased leverage. China just wants to continue to follow protocol, continue to allow relations, even if it has a veneer of stability that does offer some hope that relations won't sour so much on the U.S. side that a war occurs, right? That so all of this is about China playing the long game, right? Outweighing the United States. Everyone knows there's that hilarious meme of Xi Jinping with the headline, the CIA says that China is just waiting for the US to collapse, right? Like that is what China is ultimately going to do, because it doesn't make sense to decouple from the United States independent of US policy. It doesn't make sense to go into open conflict with the United States, because everyone knows if you go into open conflict with the United States, you're likely just going to get more conflict. The United States can't be trusted. The United States also won't be humiliated. So a lot of people like to say, Danny, how come China isn't more assertive? Why doesn't it say more admonishing things to the United States? Why doesn't it push back? Why doesn't it do what Russia's doing like Ukraine? Well, Russia was forced to do what it's doing like Ukraine. Russia had a very, how should I say, diplomatic posture toward the United States. Even at 2014 onward, like Russia was trying to make things better with the United States. It didn't work. It wasn't working. But Russia tried and tried and tried. And that has been the policy of Vladimir Putin since Putin came to power in the early 21st century. It was to try and try to try and try and try and try again to ensure that diplomatic relations with the United States are military, economic, all of it are as strong as they can be. Of course, all of that changes when there's an open military conflict on your border being fomented and waged by the United States. You could say, oh, well, that's happening in Taiwan. Well, it's not at that level, and China knows that, one, international law is on its side, and two, Taiwan that kind of conflict is a huge miscalculation by the collective West. So, try something is what China would say to that. China does not have to overplay its hand and allow itself to be drawn in to a US trap. And so China is not going to hold a similar posture in that way. However, it is going to show in other ways where exactly it stands on the world stage. And as you can see by how China has treated US diplomats, which, to be honest and to be fair, because I don't want to overstate here, it's not like China's treating them differently, right? It's not like they're saying, "Oh, well, this isn't standard protocol." Certainly, it's not as if they're, not getting rides from the airport or not, or Chinese officials are late or anything like that. However, it is bare minimum diplomatic protocol. They're getting what exactly you would get when high-level officials of any kind come visit a country, and that's it. There's no "Thank you for being here. It is great that you're here." There's no enthusiasm. There's no red carpet. There's no parties. There's no, the public relations, images, anything like that. It's all just, "Oh, you're here? Awesome. Cool. You made it. You made this trip. Let's get this over with." Because there is a growing sentiment. When I was in China, this was true. There's a growing sentiment that, actions speak louder than words. We're not really going to get excited or to make any kind of hay about something that isn't going to lead to any change. That the policy is clear, and China's not afraid. China's not afraid of that policy continuing. You saw with the Huawei Mate 60 Pro, you hear all these things about China's economy collapsing, yet it's still going to grow 6%. And, demand is rising, and, China's manufacturing base is still very much intact. Standards of living are going to continue to increase. The property crisis is overblown. You see these Peter Zahan and all these hacks talk about, "Oh, China's economy is going to collapse." Well, even though there has been a slowdown because there's a world economic slowdown, it's just a total miscalculation to think that the Chinese government is not there for the people to weather that storm. And it is, and it's always happening. I was told literally to my face, "Oh yeah, we're going to lower property values and decrease prices because we want cities to be more livable, especially the first, second tier cities, those to be more livable, because we want to bring all cities to a similar level. And that means we have to rein in some of these forces under Xi Jinping's campaign. Housing is for living, not for speculation." So these are the factors that they can't fathom, right? That the government, just like in 2007, 2008 economic crisis, will be there to bail out the Chinese people. So that goals like eliminating extreme poverty, like building world-class infrastructure, those things can continue. And that's not going to change just because COVID happened and there's a worldwide economic slowdown, or Ukraine proxy war that's destroying the energy market. Just because those things are happening doesn't mean that China is going to collapse because of it. Yes, there will be problems. Sanctions on China with tech, all of that causes problems. But as you saw with the Huawei Mate 60 Pro, China can push through them even if there will be difficulties. So to say collapse, to be all Gordon Chang about it, is not just unhelpful, but it's just counterfactual. It's just a lie. It's just a way to stir up more anti-China sentiment through fear of China's collapse. While right in front of our faces, the United States and its collective West vassals are destroying the world. And they're destroying you in the process. They're destroying your future, your present, because they want to fuel the most dangerous kinds of conflicts all around the world for the benefit of just a tiny few people, a tiny few corporations, a tiny few monopolies, tiny few number of militarists, tiny few number of neocons. These are the people that benefit. They rake in the millions and the billions, while you get to suffer on wondering whether China is going to collapse. You see the con here? So China is going to roll out the red carpet for the global south. It's going to continue to help expand BRICS, continue to help expand the Belt and Road Initiative, which the forum is happening probably as we speak, or as you watch this video in a clip later. The Belt and Road Forum will happen. The Belt and Road countries will come together. It will strengthen. Putin will be there. China will be just fine. It is the collective West with the cold and really damp mood on the side of Russia and China, and of course the rest of the global South, that needs to worry, because the more that the collective West becomes this island unto itself without the ability to enforce its assertiveness and its hegemony, the more it will unravel economically, politically, and socially. We're going to see it. We're going to see it in terms of conflict amongst people, amongst classes. We're going to see that. And we're going to have to be the ones to be positive forces in all of that, and to, of course, decry and oppose and debunk and reject all of the attempts to get us on the anti-China bandwagon as developments move forward. That's it, everybody. That's it for the stories. I'm going to do quick shout outs before I head out here. I want to shout out first a new Patreon member, Philip. I want to shout out all Patreon members who are in the audience. Sorry to Fahim, Patreon member, who asked a question to Ali. I did not get to it. We only have 45 minutes. But please do remember Electronic Intifada. That is electronic, the word in then Intifada, Intifada. Look that up on YouTube. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Catch the stream tomorrow. And you can surely ask those questions and probably get some answers, because they'll probably be talking to people on the ground there to help support the Palestinian people. Of course, there have been protests raging all across the United States, and I'm sure in the West as well. And you can find those, and surely I will message anybody to give information to that who's on Patreon, or anyone who decides to send me a DM on Twitter or what have you. But I'm going to give shout outs, but shout outs to everyone on Patreon. Of course, that's the best place to subscribe and support my work monetarily. Patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong, monthly and annual subscriptions. You get a free PDF copy of my book, my 2019 book on American exceptionalism. You get, exclusive audio posts. You get the ability to suggest content, ask questions of guests, suggest guests, and many more perks. So head over there. Patreon, Substack, and YouTube are also great ways to support monetarily. You can find all those links in the video description. Of course, you can just join as a YouTube member. I'm going to shout out all of you guys who have either joined as a member or done super chats in a minute. But of course, you can also go to my link tree in the video description and find my Telegram, t.me/DannyDhaiphong. I run a channel called China in Geopolitics there. You want to follow me there for a good place to follow me on social media that is independent of the censorial Twitter sphere. And then I'm going to send you my Rumble channel, all right, because I'm going to put that in the video chat here, the live stream chat. Do subscribe, follow me on Rumble. You can follow me on Rockfin too, both Danny Dhaiphong, but I put the link in the video description. I'm going to do that every single time I go live now, so that you know that I am on Rumble. All right. All right, everybody. Let me shout out these super chats real quick. Here we have New Beginnings, who's also a member. Thank you so much for that contribution. Thank you so much, Sailor Jerry. Thank you so much for that. Thank you so much to Alexander. Okay. Good. Thank you so much for a generous super sticker. We have Cuba C, New York, New Jersey Coalition. Welcome. Like Cuba, we need to end the blockade against Gaza, free Palestine. Thank you so much to a neighbor out here. Appreciate your support. We have R. Amin as a new member. Welcome, R. Amin. Appreciate your new membership. $4.99 per month. You can become a member here. It's another great way to support. And then we have Robo 1776 with a super sticker. Very generous. Thank you so much. All right, everybody. That's all. So just a quick announcement. I will not be live until either Wednesday, my last day in town, or that will be Wednesday night, or not at all. So I don't know if I'm going live again before I head out to my Vietnam trip. Some people were saying I should get some kind of connector or something. So send me those suggestions if you can. You all know where to find me. You can find me on Twitter at Spirit of Ho. You can DM me. I think you can DM me there if you follow me. Or tag me or whatever. Patreon also, if you are a member, you can message me there. What else? Well, you can leave a comment on YouTube. I will see it. You can, many different ways. If I think it was because people want to see me go live out there. That's a hard thing to do, just to learn, but also get the right equipment for. So I'll be doing pre-recorded videos though, and publishing them as well, in as timely a fashion as I can. I will be on a delegation. I won't be just tourism-y. I'll do some of that probably, but there's going to be a lot of good uh, events and stuff. We're going to meet with the um, VUFO. I think it's the Vietnam's Union. It's a friendship VUFA friendship associations. I'm hoping to get interviews with some of the delegation leaders there who have quite strong positions on war and have been following Ukraine and other things for quite a while. Meet someone, I know someone out there who does a lot of work on Vietnam, China. And so I'm going to try to interview a good number of people if I can, but also just make videos on my commentary and stuff like that, if interviews aren't really the thing. So with that said, everybody, this was great. Thanks for coming. This is a very important issue for me, Palestine. It's one that I don't follow as much as I used to. It used to be something I actually when I started to really follow global developments in the world. You may not know this, and maybe I can just finish with a little bit of my Palestine story. So I really didn't know anything about Palestine circa before 2010, right? I wasn't really aware of the situation. I think my high school history lesson might have mentioned it here and there. College, forget about it. Didn't learn anything in college while I was in classes. But then I remember, so, when I was in college, I was walking just in the hallway and what was called Case Center, which is literally just a place where students can gather. There's little cafes, offices, student services offices, things like that. So I'm walking through there and I see two students yelling in front of a poster. And that poster was from the group Hallel, which was the prominent Israeli Jewish organization on campus. And they were doing an event on Israel on something. I forget what it was. It was actually something to do with foreign policy, actually. And I think we actually interrupted and went to that event because they were spreading Iran nuclear lies. But the student was an Arab student from Libya, and we had many disagreements about Libya. But the most important thing was I started to listen to what they were saying, and they were talking about land and how this isn't. The student was saying this isn't the right map. This isn't what Israel really looks like. You've completely erased Palestine in this map, and so they were yelling and debating. And then I started talking to the student on the pro-Palestine side, on the Palestine side. And then I started to look into the question, study it more, read more about it. And I did work with him and a few others. There was a Palestinian student from Gaza at the school. And we actually got Norman Finkelstein to come to campus. This was 2011. And I met Norman Finkelstein at that time, which was a very interesting experience. And that's when I learned a whole lot about this conflict, about this situation, about this anti-colonial struggle, about the history, the Nakba, about it all, and how important it is to the whole geopolitical situation that we find ourselves in, the world situation that we find ourselves in. And of course, ever since, I've been unwaveringly all for Palestine's liberation, its acknowledgement, its existence, its self-determination. That for me is primary, and it's up to the Palestinian people and of course their allies to determine how that's going to happen. And so I always refrain judgment overall everything, right? We hear all kinds of reports about what is Hamas doing, how bad is it. these are things that we need to refrain judgment for until we can verify a lot of this stuff. But second of all, until we can acknowledge the gross atrocities that Israel has committed. And I like to also just end on this issue with Israel-Palestine by just saying this isn't, when it comes to Palestine, it's simply not just a Palestine question. Palestine often gets separated, right? It's like this special niche issue. Leftists do this, and of course, people on all parts of the political spectrum do this. They look at it as a special little niche for them to quibble about, to pontificate over. But it really does fall within a global and regional context. How do you think Palestine's resistance is getting these weapons? Surely it could be from the black market that has exploded because of the Ukraine crisis. All these weapons that US and the West and NATO have sent, those weapons have gone every which way. And certainly, I'm sure Hamas and some Palestinian resistance groups have gotten their hands on them. But then you have to wonder, how has Palestine's resistance been able to wage intifada after intifada all of this time, despite being so heavily isolated and brutalized? Well, it's because they also have support from governments, countries, and movements. Hezbollah in Lebanon, Iran in Syria. I'm sure there are forces that support Palestine all across the region. So, with that said, we have to understand Palestine as not simply a question of just Palestine, because that would make the mistake of seeing Palestinian people as separate from the broader region. And certainly the Palestinian nation should exist, or there should be a nation that is acknowledged in league with the rest of the nations that have self-determination. So that is all to say that if we remember from history, the Cold War era, when the 67 war in and of itself was a regional war, right? When you had pan-Arabism, all of these historical facts, right? Where you have Syria and Iraq and Egypt, these countries that, there's a lot of divisions, there's leadership differences, there's different movements, different political parties and factions, but there's a pretty broad unity around how they all view Palestine. Why? It's because there used to be a broad pan-Arab movement that was nationalist in character and fought back against not just foreign encroachment, but also Israel as an entity, Israel as a projection of power in the region for foreign invaders. That's what Israel is. It is a collection of foreign invaders. It is a colonial state. It's an outpost. And that is fact. So no matter what you think about what should happen to Palestine, to Israelis, what should happen to the Israeli government, what its status should be, we have to deal with the facts first. My personal opinion, if it would be one government that however the conflict is to be settled, acknowledges Palestine's existence, and that government then rules to the benefit of all people, which means, in effect, full decolonization. The two-state solution, I get why it's there. It has historical precedent. It has teeth behind it internationally, has been recognized after UN resolution after UN resolution since the 67 war, and those borders were essentially violated and changed. I get why it's there. I get why China and Russia talk about it in the way that they do. I get why it's important to talk about a Palestinian state. So but at the end of the day, we're going to have to talk about why it gets to this point. Why it gets to this point of the only language that can be spoken is one of armed resistance. And it gets to this point because the conditions of the people do not allow for anything else. And it gets to this point because the idea that Palestine can be just separated from Israel without acknowledging just how many Israelis, how most of them, if not all of them, sit in stolen houses on stolen land, and they do so with the backing of a military that is brutalizing people, that is destroying people's lives, killing them in mass, killing children and women, imprisoning them, starving them, blockading them, all of it. Gaza's an open-air prison. Most people there do not have clean drinking water. They don't, because they have drinking water unfit for human consumption. That means that place is completely unlivable, and it's Israel's doing. Does that really allow for any other kind of resistance? Does it sound like there's a force there willing to negotiate for true, genuine justice? Not just peace, not just, oh, well, we're not going to fight, but justice and overturning those horrid conditions? No. So that is the big problem here. And so that's why my position is it's going, it's going to be up to Palestinians to determine this, but it's likely to shape out because of the nature and the character and how the fighting, how the struggle is going to happen. It's probably not going to be Israel and Palestine being able to sit at a table talking about, well, how do we respect each other's governments? It's probably going to have to be a political situation that is born from, well, you've been defeated. The ruling situation, the ruling parties, the Zionists, that you've been defeated. Now we're going to have to talk about terms. And that's why this conflict is going on the way it is right now, because until there's political leverage, until there's power in the hands of Palestinian people, negotiations are always going to lead to a dead end, because Israel is going to demand settlements. Israel is going to demand more seizures of land, territory. It's going to demand that it's allowed with impunity to behave the way it does. And it's also going to continue to do what it does globally. What does it do globally? It strikes Syria every other day. It is looking to overthrow Iran. It wants to see the entire region come under the dominion of the collective West, and really of itself. It has a greater look at the Greater Israel Project. That thing exists. It wants um, a greater Israel project. Israel wants to have dominion. It wants to have control. It'll never have direct control. It's a fantasy. Look at, if it can't fight Hamas and the Al-Qassam brigades, it certainly can't repeat the 67 war again regionally. But at the same time, what it wants is it wants total destabilization. Read the clean break document from Bibi Netanyahu himself. Read the Oded Yunan plan, right? These from the 1980s. These are all plans that show that Israel wants to see the entire region in complete and utter chaos and under regimes that are compliant to its rule. That's why Israel is the most enthusiastic supporter of overthrowing Syria, of overthrowing Libya in 2011. It was very much in support of that. That's why it's in support of any effort on the African continent. Israel is all over the place. Why? Because it hopes that the African continent will be compliant in its project to terrorize people. It wants to continue to expand. Hey, Egypt happens to be in Africa as much as it is considered part of the Arab world. So that is to say that Israel is a global project. It is a global power projection project of empire. And Palestine then is an issue for the entire world to pay attention to be in solidarity with, and to understand the geopolitical significance of it beyond just the idea that Palestine must be free. Indeed, Palestinians need self-determination, need freedom, but they can't do that in isolation. And in fact, they are not doing that in isolation right now. You can see in Yemen, massive street support, street protests, street rallies in support of Palestine. Iraq, we've seen images come out of there, support of Palestine. Egypt, many people in support of Palestine. Iran, right? Syria, state support, like literal state support. And then, of course, you have Hezbollah in Lebanon, a powerful political force, if not the most powerful political force in Lebanon, in support of Palestine. And maybe, just maybe, we'll be fighting directly against Israel if Israel launches a ground war. Hezbollah has sent off warning shots, sent off missiles, and we will see if there will be a ground war if Israel decides to wage a full-scale operation in Gaza. It's doing a bombing campaign as we speak, but if it does, Hezbollah will be in the fight. And then Syria and Iran, are they far behind, right? And we will see how the cookies crumble with the other Arab states, the client regimes, the more compliant ones, maybe those on the fence, Saudi Arabia, the KSA. We've seen kind of a mishmash of contradictions there, wanting normalization with Israel for its own benefit, but also understanding that, hey, heads might roll, literally, if Saudi Arabia rebukes the Palestinian people and rejects them. Because, hey, you're still an Arab state. You might be a monarchy. You might think you can do whatever you want. But Saudi Arabia has been playing things very particularly of late because it wants to see its reign continue. So, BRICS membership, diversifying your portfolio, rapidly developing, raising standard of living, these kind of things, right? Getting closer to Russia and China, all of that provides leverage for Saudi Arabia. Abandoning the Palestinian people, especially politically and in terms of your even public relations support, well, that's a disaster waiting to happen internally in Saudi Arabia. So it's going to be very interesting to see. But the point here is that Palestine has never been isolated. Palestine has always had friends. It's just that the United States and Israel, and of course the European vassals that slavishly just, do whatever they want to fortify, do whatever they can to fortify the Israeli project. They've made it really difficult for the Palestinian people. Dare I say, they've tortured them. They've attempted to eliminate them, to eradicate them off the face of the earth. Well, they had another thing. Always, they've had another thing coming, and now we're seeing chickens coming home to roost. And so, for all those out there, this will be my final word on the topic tonight. All those out there, from friends, supposed friends, right? Like Cornel West, someone I consider even a personal friend, heavily disagree with the way he's run his campaign, especially on this issue. And there's just no excuses for it. If I want to say I get it because you're trying to appeal to broad ranges of people, I think that the time has come that there needs to be really concrete. If you can take a concrete position on NATO, that NATO needs to end, then you can take a concrete position that the only way for any kind of hostilities to end is for Israel's reign of terror to end, and to prioritize that, given that we sit in the belly of the beast. So that's just my 2 cents. So if Cornel West, RFK Jr., forget about it. I mean, he's in the Israeli lobby's pocket, obviously. Like, this dude is not, he's a fraud. But, a lot of people want to hold on to him. COVID stuff, they have an affinity around that. Okay, do you. Ukraine. Oh, he has a decent position on Ukraine. Well, okay, but guess what? He's hobnobbing with the same people who are destroying. He's the one telling Joe Biden how much he loves his response to what's going on with Palestine. Can you really trust him on Ukraine? Can you really trust politicians? How many times do we have to have this conversation? I don't even like having it anymore. I don't have it anymore, really. I mean, I have it when I have to have it, but I don't want to have the conversation. Oh, why are you trusting these politicians? Why are you trusting Bernie Sanders? Why are you trusting Elon Omar? Why are you trusting AOC? Why are you trusting Robert F. Kennedy Jr.? As Ali Abunimah said on this show, who cares what they say? They are frauds. They are liars. It's about the system. It's about who they work for, what they work under. You might feel powerless when you think about it like that. You might feel like you're lonely on an island. You might feel like you're not on some team. But when you realize the truth, then you can operate better collectively to start to undo this reality that we live under, right? We have to come at this from the basis of reality, not from the basis of some political fantasy, not from the basis of some misplaced hope. Those days should have been over a long time ago. And so, for all those who want to do both sidesism, Marianne Williamson, anybody, I don't care who you are. Oh, this is one side. Oh, they're all bad. Oh, we got to condemn everything that's being done right now. You're not only are you missing the mark, but you are in fact possibly more dangerous than those who are so slovenly going along with Israel. You're more dangerous than Rishi Sunak blowing kisses to Israel. Joe Biden blowing kisses. You're more dangerous because we know where they stand, right? But you're misleading a whole lot of people by caving under the pressure of Israeli influence, of Zionist influence, and of course of just the influence of the warmongers by singing apologies for a conflict that was always the fault of Israel, always the fault of the United States. It falls at their feet. And so to try to move the goalpost away from that, well, there's nothing more to say to that than it's duplicitous, it's wrong, and you're on the wrong side of history. And that's it. You're on the wrong side of history. That's where you are. And that's where you will remain unless you're able to change your mind, unless you're able, and then change the way you behave, change the way you do things, change the way you talk, change the way you operate publicly. This goes for any issue. This goes for the Russia, Ukraine. This goes for China. This goes for Iran. This goes for any foreign policy issue. And it really goes for any issue at the workplace. Hey, you can't play both sides at the workplace with the boss if you're fighting for a class struggle. You know, that's kind of destroyed the workers' movement in America. It's destroyed it. Playing both sides. Ooh, let's collectively bargain. Let's like shake hands all day, as if the boss doesn't have all the power. It has all the capital. It has all the ability. It has management rights. No, not until you strike, not until you say, hey, I'm taking a stand and you're going to give me what I want and until you do, we're going to do X, Y, Z to make it very hard for you. That's effective. That's politics, not, oh, let's shake hands. Let's pretend like we're equals here. We're partners. No, you're not partners. You're not partners. And that goes the same for foreign policy. That goes the same for questions of empire. Nah, you're not partners. No, whatever Palestinians do, whatever Hamas does, not the same. It never will be the same. And it's not until Palestinians have power till we can truly judge what the character of Palestinian self-determination will look like, just like with any country, right? We never really know how a people will rule until they have the power to rule. And that's what this is all about. People have the right. Nations have the right. Oppressed people have the right to rule and determine their own destiny. That's it. That's international law. But that's really just genuine principles. If you are a geopolitical analyst, if you are a activist, a leftist, or whatever you are, these are just principles. These are just basics, right? That we should all be adhering to, strengthening, all of that. But that said, everyone, I've talked a lot. That's my position. That's my 2 cents on the matter. But with that said, everybody, it's been really great. Of course, on your way out, like the stream, hit the notifications bell. Be sure to subscribe to the channel. Support the channel on Patreon, patreon.com/Dhaiphong. Go to the video description and find all the other ways, from one-time options, monthly options, yearly options, YouTube, Substack, buy me a coffee. And hopefully I'll see you on Wednesday. If I don't, I will see you next month live. But I will be in Vietnam. I'll make sure to send all kinds of updates, video updates, community updates. And hopefully I will have some good content to share with you and keep abreast of the situations ongoing. It's been great to be with all this evening. Bye-bye. Take care. Good night. See you again. Maybe soon. Maybe next month. We'll see.